Carrie, introduce yourself.
Okay, great. So I'm Carrie Girstantas, and trained as a special ed teacher, which most of you all know. Have a lot of years of working with students with a myriad of different issues. And so we're going to spend we're going to spend some time talking specifically about test anxiety. So what I'd like to do to start is have everybody spend a little bit of time thinking about how they're affected by tests and test anxiety. So I'm going to give everybody a test. I'm going to give you a piece of paper. Shaking on. Yeah. Don't turn it over till I say go. Can't look at it. Can't even know it's on the page. Get something to write with. This will be timed and this will count. It matters. Your performance matters.
Oh.
Seriously. Don't try to sidestep it. It's serious, man. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's your mark. Get set. Go.
Wait, this is not.
Like, wait a second, I'm verbal.
Sabotage.
So you have 15 more seconds. And stop. So maybe not a stressful task for everybody in the room, but
Preliminarily.
I'd like to just take a moment and sort of reflect on, or just have you guys share with me some of the things that happen when we're asked to perform under stress. So anything you noticed either in this task or thinking about your students or, yes?
I kind of just said like the mythology of things. So for me, like when I feel really overwhelmed, I want to kind of take things step by step. So I found this day of like, you know, I can probably do the mental athletically, but for me, I felt more calm actually with the ritual of it, which takes more time. Like,
Okay.
So almost like it's kind of reactive coping mechanisms that could be important.
Okay, so you wanted to write stuff down.
Yes.
Okay. So really what we're talking about is response to stress and how we perform under stress. And so do you think that was a learned strategy? Why do you write things down so your response is I want to write things down?
Yeah, I think it's probably learning. I think it's really adaptive. Like,
okay.
It keeps me well. I mean, yeah, because it means I'm not gonna make small mistakes. So.
Okay. Anything else? Anything you noticed while doing this activity?
Well, I noticed that since it was under time, I found myself doing it very fast. I didn't write anything down, And as I was moving on to the next problem, I was moving so fast that I was still double checking my work as I was moving on. So a lot of times I was like, oh wait, no, that should have been 5, or it should have been 6. So I was going back a lot because I was so stressed for time. So
Okay.
I was working too fast, I guess you could say.
Okay, to rush too fast, okay. So kind of working on 2 problems at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
I wasted a lot of time on the first one,
Okay.
because I was always bad at my 12s.
Yes.
Okay, so you kind of got into the little, like you got stuck.
I'm like, I should know this, and instead of just moving on like I was on a student too,
Yes.
I just was like, I am almost 40 years old, I should be able to.
Yeah.
Actually, that might be the inverse of the portion you've never been. Now it's going to be less and less likely to remember it.
I was thinking how ashamed Knox would be of me for not knowing.
Yeah.
Yes, and so that circuit overload feeling of, I should know this, I
Yeah,
don't, and the anxiety of, okay, this is taking too long, I wish I knew it, I should know it, but I've gotta move on.
Yeah.
And I hope the next problem isn't like this one.
Yeah, it's all spelled, right?
Yeah.
How about heart rate? How was everyone's heart rate when they were doing this activity?
Elevated.
Yeah.
Yeah, so your heart rate goes up. Okay, so heart rate goes up.
I feel like mine stayed the same, but I mean, I was really conscious of trying to keep it like, because I mean, I know my stress level enough to know that when I get it, I almost tend to go in that like reactive mode. So, but I was much slower in the process of it. So like,
Okay. Yeah.
I immediately had the comparison fear of I don't want to be the dumb kid in the class and the slowest one who got the fewest problems done.
Okay.
I'm up against
Well,
these peers and coaches and
Sure, let's grade it right now. Let's see where you stack up.
Which name put all those answers?
it's like you don't want to expose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exposed.
And then one more thing, I couldn't, the circuit overload kind of, I couldn't, easily, you know, like I know what 10 minus 4 is, but it's that feeling of like,
10 minutes for 10 minutes for 10
Yeah.
minutes for 10 minutes for come on, move on. Yeah. And so we have a lot of different, so we have our heart rate up, we've got a lot of kind of mental chatter, monkey chatter going on in our head. Maybe we've got some adaptive strategies. We've got just sort of stopping and waiting, I don't know for what, but maybe just kind of sitting there stuck. Ultimately, what got you unstuck? Do you know?
I realized what I would tell the student to do is just move on, so I just decided to
Okay.
move on.
So some voice came back into your head. It's like, oh yeah, dude, come on, let's
Yeah, I
just
was waiting for a 4th grade memory. And then I was like,
Yeah, you're not a 4th grader.
You know, I also noticed when you said 15 seconds left, I was a lot less efficient because I was even more so thinking, I have to get so much done, and then I was so stressed out that I hardly got anything done in those 15 seconds.
Okay. So weird freeze. Yeah, freeze, yeah, it was a freeze response. Okay, so we have kids take tests all the time in lots of different ways. And so the goal of what I hope to bring up today is to somewhat split the hair a little bit in terms of the difference. I'm still in the picture, don't worry. I can walk all the way over here, and I can walk all the way over here.
Totally fine, totally fine.
Jazz hands.
It's all okay. That I want to give you guys a sort of like a zone of what is a normal fear response. I'm gonna start over, well, maybe over this concept. But the idea is that I'm gonna give you a normal fear response, and I'm also gonna give you a sense of sort of this extreme of really when we're dealing with sort of an anxiety response that might be beyond normal fear. So maybe something that's a little bit more unmanageable for our students, maybe a situation or circumstances that we might need more support or have to do a little bit more unraveling or unpacking of it. And I also want to talk about, at the other extreme, some possibilities of when there may be some limitations in the student's cognitive abilities that are complicating the capacity for them to either respond normally to fear or really to be under timed conditions. So, I mean, it wasn't implied in this, but when we talk about test anxiety, it's typically either the high performance kinds of tests as well as the timed tests. So I am going to talk specifically about the constraint of time and what that's kind of adding to the level of stress. So, you know, and then and as always, the goal is to get us more into the zone of what can we do, maybe what can we not do, where do we need to be, what can we do as a coach, and what maybe we need to be asking a family to be working on outside the context of coaching or test taking, or and or if there really is a need for an accommodation. And so sometimes those accommodations aren't obvious at the onset, but then when we start working with someone, it's like, oh, this really isn't. And I think we recently are working with a student who finally got the time and a half on the SAT, and the difference, not just, I mean, his performance score went up so significantly. And one of the questions was, why did that extra few minutes make such a difference? And really it had to do with, I think it had, one, he had a lot more preparation, and we can talk about, you know, working on ways to not be responding as fearful to a task. But I also think by not having the constraint of that he was having to put too much into a short amount of time, that it freed him up to be able to perform in easier at a higher level. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So in terms of these experiences, the things that I do want to make sure that I give some more discussion to, because they are, so self-talk is something that's really important. I'm gonna call it self-awareness. And maybe it's also called mindfulness. Maybe this is another name for that. But mindfulness is our capacity to recognize how we are responding to a circumstance. And that so this sort of stuck response and realizing like, oh, I actually can go on or do something different and then come back to it, or I can just skip it altogether. That's a kind of mindfulness. I think Christiana, you mentioned like, you know, like when you notice your heart rate going up, you maybe trying to do some breathing to help bring your heart rate down. So again, that's also in the category of mindfulness. We have some capacity to affect some change of that biology, but then there's a lot that we actually don't. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what will that look like. So the stuck response, the freeze response, just the general fight, flight, freeze response is a normal biological response. And so when I talk about normal, I don't necessarily mean optimal or desired response, but merely that we are biological beings and that when put into certain situations, we respond, and that's sort of that's innate to us, and so we have a lot of opportunity to make change over that, but we do have to sort of start with the way that we're just sort of wired. And again, then we also are talking about adaptive strategies. So this is more the range of where we would maybe call it metacognition. We may also call this learning. So I don't know at what age you may have started the strategy of writing things down. It may have been something that a teacher told you to do in elementary school and you did it and it worked. It may be something that you had a number of bad experiences of messing up things, and then you're like, hey, wow, maybe I should try this, and you found something that worked for yourself. So whether that learning came from direct instruction, somebody outside of you telling you try this and seeing that it worked, but somewhere, I'm gonna even say skill, you know, that you had to then use the skill. It wasn't enough just to tell you about it, you actually had to start employing it. So I'm just gonna erase this stuff. Okay. So, before I get any further, I wanna find out from you guys if there's any particular scenarios or situations or questions that you have before we get much further. So I've sort of kind of brought you into, hopefully by experience, into this zone. And hopefully you can still think straight, but what are some of the questions that kind of continue to sort of vex you when working with students?
So I think, and we probably all kind of have this in some level, that kind of really interesting place of where cognitive inability means emotional distress, and kind of like when there is a valid element of the fact that some of our students they just actually can't do it. They either don't know mentally how to do it, or they just don't have the skill set. And so the emotional piece isn't irrational. It's overcomable. It's surmountable, but it's not, you know, they can't fix problems. So it's rational. They're gonna feel this way.
So the emotional distress, the component of just watching someone who is having an emotionally distressing response.
Right, based on the fact that it's something they also don't know. So it's the emotional distress combined with the fact they actually don't have the skill set to complete the information. So like they either haven't learned it yet or they're really weak in it, and so they kind of just get like frozen, or like I tested a straight analysis, you just skipped a bunch because he just didn't know.
Right. Any other?
Making the leap from practice to test taking. I had a student who was doing well in time practice and then he just couldn't translate it to the test. And I don't know why.
Okay.
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Questions.
So we're and okay, we'll talk more about that. Did you have any other specific questions?
I don't work directly with students, but I would have the question of, does an anxiety response, can it lead to an overall sense of failure and therefore a sense of giving up? So when you see a student who's just sledging along and doesn't care anymore, is it because of repeated failure? But I don't know if that's always related to anxiety.
Okay. So what is the normal fear response? So there's a lot of different research over the course of time and relating to fear response. So the things that I'm going to be sharing with you come more from my experience, from at least what I've learned as an educator in the realm of behavior management and basic psychology. And the caveat I will put is that there's a tremendous amount of current research that is ongoing in the realm of fear response. And much of it does have to do with people with post-traumatic stress disorder. So that is sort of like one of the sort of zones of where, again, it's sort of a far distance, it's a far cry from test anxiety to post-traumatic stress disorder, but there are the tools and methods that are effective with that population are also applicable in some ways to day-to-day stresses. So let's talk about normal fear response. So first of all, the region of the brain they believe is most involved with our fear response is called the amygdala. So, and it's a mediator between other regions of the brain. And so what's important to understand about that is it works a little bit like a switch. So, and at least this is what the sort of compelling research is. And so again, this all might topple at some point. But when we talk about the fight, flight, freeze response, it is mitigated by the amygdala. And more importantly, that it acts as a sort of a gatekeeper for a lot of our higher order capacities. And so in anatomy and physiology or in psychology, you get some basic understanding that we've got two different aspects of our nervous system working. One of them helps us when we are in conditions of, if there's an emergency, and then we've got another set of our nervous system that is for just normal day-to-day activity. And so when it comes to fear conditioning, so when there's an unexpected situation, we have a biological response of fear. And the normal fear response would be that over time, so in the experiments they typically run are with like mice and lights. So you take a mouse and you put shine a light on them, and their very first response is fear. And then if you continue to show the bright light over time, the mouse will stop having a fear response to the light, because it's like, oh, that light thing, and it just kind of moves along its business. So that's what you would expect the trajectory to be. If you put this light and you put a shock at the same time, then over time you can stop giving the mouse the shock, but it still responds to the light as if it's been shocked. And so that sort of general trajectory is a sort of a known mechanism of the way these systems work. And so I don't think it necessarily requires something quite as extreme as that, but oftentimes when we are dealing with somebody with test anxiety, we're talking about sort of a long-standing response to what is happening in their lives quite frequently, honestly. You have a number of test-taking circumstances that occur in most students' academic experience. And so they have come up with some way to manage that stress. In the best case scenario, just like what we did today, that when we are under stress, that we then come up with some strategy to de-stress ourselves. And so, one of the more infamous ones is like cats in particular. If cats have a scary thing happen, they've got some certain ritual. I think it has to do with them spinning and licking, and they do something, and it just hits the reset button. And so we also have the capacity for some of these resets. It's just that we've sort of lost our capacity to do them automatically. So the other thing that I'll mention, because we're working with students of all ages, is that so there's two kinds of interventions. There's interventions that are top down and interventions that are bottom up. And what I mean by that is bottom up is that we would be somehow impacting the lower brain centers that then affects our capacity to think more clearly with our neocortex, or we're going to use some aspect of our neocortex to inform our lower brain centers to say, hey, calm down. Most of the strategies, by the way, that you guys brought up are these top-down approaches. When I ask myself, and I would say the counter to your, Sarah, your self-talk that was kind of harsh and judgmental on yourself, you would also have the capacity to do some self-talk that would be self-soothing and supportive. You could have said, I know I can do this, okay, I remember this, I studied this, okay, I just have to do my best. So again, self-talk is a really important top-down strategy that helps us calm these lower brain centers. When we are working with students of all ages, that all of these top-down strategies really don't become as available for a student until they get into adolescence, when those brain centers are starting to mature. So
It's not until adolescence.
adolescence.
Okay.
And so many of the strategies, so if you are seeing anxiety response or fear response in younger children, it is really imperative that the teachers and parents and schools work with that child to back them away from the edge. Because they don't really yet have the capacity to do a whole lot about it. Yeah.
I'm just thinking of Rotarian students, so.
Thinking of what, I'm sorry.
Rotarian students, are students who are in foster care.
Yes.
So in terms of students who've been repeatedly emotionally traumatized, like
Yes.
having, because there's some say that you just kind of get stuck in certain places, right? So even though physiologically you kind of evolve, like front parts of your brain still very much stuck in like pre-adolescent states.
So absolutely, there are certain life experiences that can occur for specific people that are going to kind of thwart or kind of hold back that development. So, and the other caveat to that is, so some literature refers to ADD and ADHD as really a developmental delay. So it's not that some of these, so when you're working with a student that may be 14 with attention deficit, they may actually be working with, the capacity to recruit their executive functioning of maybe like a 10 or 11-year-old. So that some of the issues that are arising in the classroom setting or in the school setting is just the fact that, and actually it's somewhat characteristic, like they kind of look more like, that they might look more like a third grader than a sixth, or they might require the structure of third grade when they're in middle school. So it's not that they're not ever going to develop it, it's just that, and again, I guess that's a certain amount of discrepancy about what the outcomes and the possibilities, but, most of the research I spend a lot of time thinking about are the ones related to neuroplasticity, where there actually is a tremendous amount of capacity that we have to recruit other parts of our cognitive functioning, and that we also have the capacity to sort of fill in aspects of our cognitive function that are struggling.
So that situation, like you have a student who's very much so frozen, is just really kind of, I don't say archaic, but just young kind of coping skills. And would you actually encourage working with them as if you were working with someone who's like much younger, or would you try to invoke other kind of skill sets to bring them up to speak developmentally?
So one of the things that I feel like is a general principle that we offer as coaches, and as teachers as well, is that we have the opportunity to allow the student to recruit our executive functioning. So we become a resident expert. And so by becoming their resident expert in this moment, I might give you a list of things, I might do prioritization for you. So if I've got a student that kind of freaks out when there's 3 different ways to approach a problem, I might become that executive function and say, well, this time when we do the practice test, I just want you to try this strategy and let's see how it works. So I take on some of the decision making to allow them just to execute. And I may invoke certain self-talk. The main thing that is a take-home message for test anxiety is to prescribe the what-ifs. So the worst thing that can happen for a student is that they encounter something so novel that they get into stuckness. And, for some people, and I call it falling out of gear, that you just sort of everything just stops. So you need to, particularly under these times, and so the big strategy that I'm bringing up is the one of normalizing the stress. So it's predictable that your heart rate's going to rise. So we don't want your heart rate rising to be the thing that gets you to run out of the room suddenly during a test, because, well, we know that's gonna happen. So we kind of go through with the students and we say, what happens to you when you're under stress? Okay, my heart rate goes up, my stomach starts to hurt. So do you think there's really any problem with your heart rate going up? You know, like once you get past the idea that your heart rate's up, it's kind of like, oh yeah, it's that heart rate thing going up. You know, my stomach hurting. Do I really have a stomach ache? I mean, like, you know, 5 minutes ago, did I have a stomach ache? No. Why do I have a stomach ache? I have a stomach ache because I'm taking a test. So again, you're gonna normalize the biological response and say, oh, it's that stomach thing. I'm not sick. I'm not gonna throw up. And if you do throw up, well, then we'll do that too. You know what I mean? Like, but that's the normalizing it. And again, kind of even, you can make it funny, you can make, you know, like, because those things we don't, and this is something that's really hard to get people to really believe. It's hard for me as a grown adult to like sometimes accept. Like, sometimes we really don't have control over our biological responses to stress. I have no control over it. The fact that I start sweating, I really do practice yoga. I do want to be a yogini, but I may not be able to control the sweat when I'm feeling scared. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, so by normalizing it, we've now taken the student out of a more, like, hopefully they won't get as stuck. So the kinds of things that we're talking about right now are all fairly normal responses to fear. So the other kinds of strategies that are gonna work to normal fear when you're taking a test are what I'm gonna call self-soothing behaviors. I'll just kind of put that in here. So I noticed you doing a self-soothing behavior, the putting your hand on your head is maybe a self-soothing. Some people might kind of pat their heart, you know, kind of assuring yourself like it's gonna be okay. And so I actually say those words often with a student when we're tutoring, when we're doing tests, when we get ready to begin a test. I always give them, so I really do use a lot of positive self-talk with my students as we practice, as we are working, in hopes that it's going to kind of move with them when they practice in other settings. You know, because, and again, we can talk about some of the more extreme, you know, what happens at these other ends of the spectrum. Putting your hand, another weird thing that can be, is putting a pencil in your mouth.
I was gonna say, 'cause I know some students like that.
So putting a pencil in your mouth, like you have to invoke the muscles of smiling, which you put your pencil in your mouth. So you can't stay angry when you're smiling. This is like this weird, like I was talking about this amygdala thing being binary. You know, we just can't do those two things simultaneously. We can't smile and be angry at the same time. So, I don't know. So that's really smiling. And that's, you know, we can smirk, there's all these different emotions that we can have, but we can't smile. So, anyway, put your pencil in your mouth.
Can we go back to
Sure.
the self-soothing talk?
Sure.
That you're sort of parroting first? It's not affirmations, right? It's not saying good job, it's something before that.
It's before that.
Yeah.
It's saying, oh, I know we've worked on this problem before. I know you can do this.
Okay.
I'm confident that these are problems that are doable for you. So it's the talk that, like when she was saying, I'm not as good as, or we have to be focused on what's doable. Because if they tend to get over-focused on what's not being done, and I think you were mentioning this also, is like, you start going through the test, and I've seen kids want to burst into tears because they kept having to skip problems. I couldn't do it, I can't do this, I can't. So you've got to get them into a place, well, what can you do? Okay, well, I can eliminate that this problem's not right. I can circle the words that I think are important. I can rewrite the question. So again, really making it prescriptive of what are you gonna do when you encounter something that you just feel like you can't do. And the first thing you're gonna do is say, okay, I can do this. I know, or I'm gonna say, I'm gonna circle that and come back to it. And so one of the strategies, one of the prescriptions that I give students is just to rewrite the problem. If you really don't know what to do, just rewrite some part of the problem. And that's, or just, because you can always figure that out. I can always figure out, what is this question asking me? What is X? Okay, X is. And so then you can even use just that information to possibly eliminate something. So again, what we're trying to do is keep a person out of a state of fear. And the thing is with high stakes testing is they can only take it once, they have to pay money, as best as you can to pull the stresses away, assuring them this is something you can take again. Many students have to take this more than once. Just those messages alone are going to support a student in staying out of stress. Okay, so I kind of jumped all the way ahead to solutions, but that's okay. The other solution that I'm going to talk about is taking a mini break. So students that get really freaked out, they might need to take a mini break. And so one mini break is calming. Just like if they really feel like they're about to jump out of their skin because they're uncomfortable, giving them a strategy like, okay, well that might happen, what are you gonna do? And so you have to be able to give them something, you have to prescribe the what am I gonna be able to do?
What's it for you? Like rubbing your
Oh, you rub your hands together, you put your hands over your eyes.
Okay. So what is it? So can I ask like why they're rubbing hands together first? Like is that just
It's just to make them a little more warm.
Okay.
And then you just put it, and then you just take a deep breath. Okay, and then I can get back to it. And so I've had students that, and we'll talk more about specifically with slow processing speed, like they really do need to take a break. They are working and they're working and they're working and they really need to take a break. And that's something that they can do in a very short amount of time, not taking away from their test, but allows them to kind of reset themselves. So again, we're looking for ways to help them reset to kind of not get stuck in fight, flight, and freeze.
So this would be kind of jumping out of order a little bit, but I know we talked about kind of the framework and stuff. Like have like an exam counselor, she and I did this with some of my kids during the summer, she recommended kind of actually putting your hands kind of going back and forth just for calming stuff. Yeah,
so there are some specific, and a lot of them come from my experience with Brain Gym and working with OTs. Certainly even, so crossing your legs, crossing your arms, kind of allows your body to reset. And it does activate both the left and the right hemisphere at the same time. So again, what the amygdala, because the amygdala is this mediator, oftentimes what happens is that we lose our capacity to be fluent across our thinking. So we might get stuck in, looking for a detail when really we needed to be looking at the whole picture, or you might be we might be able to kind of see where we're trying to go, but I can't figure out what the first step is. So it allows us to get a little bit more balance or fluency in it. So let's talk about, so that's a little bit about the amygdala, that's a little bit about the normal fear response, and sort of the biological basis, and then also our biological, sort of cure. And so some of those actually include a little bit of bottom-up stuff. So certainly if I'm, certainly using your breath is a good one, that's a bottom-up approach. I mean, yes, anytime that we, and the strategy for breath is that you want to emphasize the exhale. So like take a short breath in and a long breath out. So long breaths out are what's gonna let you reset your nervous system. So short breath in, so I typically go count to 2 in and count to 5 out. So those are some of the bottom up versus top down strategies. So let's talk about the other ways that stress is going to impact our test performance. So now I'm not necessarily talking about fear per se, but I am talking about stress and prolonged stress. And so stress is really anytime we perceive a threat. And so when we get into the situation of, so this is about the student's perception of what they're doing. And so that can have a huge impact on how they're gonna be impacted by things. But, so now what we're moving into is the question of learning. And so stress can impact, so stress can affect the way that we are learning, but also stress can impact, so it's both the how we are learning, or if we are learning. It can also affect our capacity to access what we know. And so now we're talking about how stress is going to be affecting memory. Okay. So, memory is only, so many of the struggles that start coming up for students is that we feel like we're teaching them something and then they walk away and it's like, I thought I understood it, now I don't understand anything. Like, what happened? I was doing so well and then it just all went away. So the question becomes, did any of what we do get actually stored in their long-term memory? Or did it get stored in their long-term memory and they're just having a heck of a time getting it back out? Okay, so there's lots of possibilities. But when we're talking about memory and memory formation, and specifically, we have both our, long-term knowledge and procedural, capacities. We also have short-term things that so what ends up happening is that many students, because they're under such stress when they're in the learning environment, that it kind of sieves out of them, that it never actually gets put into long-term memory. If a student is under prolonged stress for whatever reason, and it can be just their perception of it, and this really honestly happens all the time in math. There are children that walk into math classrooms and before a teacher even opens their mouth, they're so stressed out that you're gonna have a heck of a time them actually retaining. They might perform just fine, they might do what you've asked them to do, but they might not be able to remember anything because they're so quick to try and get it done and just be done with it. And that's one of the things we have to caution ourselves for. So as tutors and in our sessions, you know, again, we want to have a certain temperament of presence. You know, that we want our sessions to be an opportunity for them not to be just sort of like frantically trying to get through stuff. Because if they're frantically trying to get through stuff, there's a good chance it's not gonna stay for very long. So the region of our brain that mitigates whether stuff is getting into our memory is our hippocampus. And so our hippocampus is that part that's helping us. And the hippocampus is also involved in our self-regulation. So again, it's you know, these things are all sort of interrelated. But again, if the choice is between survival and remembering something you learned in math class, you know, it's gonna most likely err on the side of survival, at least what it perceives of as survival. But unfortunately, it doesn't stick around. And so that's what we have to be aware of. The other thing that happens is that if the level of stress under the test situation is too much for the student, they might not be able to access what they know. So in order for us to get information out of our memory, we also have to be somewhat calm and capable. So, and again, I'm going to show you a few Gibson, you know, the cognitive screenings on a few students, and I wanted to show you some students that have diminished capacities in these areas and how it affects their test taking, and things that we can do. Now, so they don't necessarily need to be discrepant for an episode of stress to be impacting them. So, and I do this a lot. I use this a lot actually in the classroom when I'm working with students. I mean, it really, really is the case that if a student is too stressed out when you're providing instruction, there's no way for it to get to put into long-term memory. If they are racing, if they are not mindful when they are doing certain activities, it's not going to stick around. What's that word? The other thing that starts to happen, well then let me, so let's talk about our cognitive abilities. So now we're starting to get into the zone of, what we're experiencing something that is discrepant enough that it's going to impact them on and on and on. And so the thing about our cognitive abilities is that there is both a structural and a functional component to it. And so what I mean by that is there's a certain amount, certainly we come with a certain sort of hand that we're dealt, but then we have our experience of learning that happens over time. And in that response to learning, I can either build up certain capacities, like if I can begin to find ways to use my memory better, or I can develop habits that are going to kind of keep me from ever really developing my capacities for memory. And so by the time most of us are working with students, they're going to be a little bit older, and so some of these patterns, it's almost neither here nor there, whether it's structural or functional, because if this is what they're working with today, if this is their baseline capacities, until we can make some long-term changes, it's going to be pretty hard to figure it out. The one thing I'm gonna say is that, just to reinforce this idea of memory and stress, is that I have seen reports from psychologists that do the full battery of psychological testing. And if that student is in a state of depression or high anxiety, they will not score it because they feel like it is not representative of their capacity, particularly in the areas of memory. So most of the other capacities aren't going to be affected, but your capacity to remember is so intertwined with that affect, and it could just be an intermittent bout of grief that could have a significant capacity for memory. So again, mental, so this is not something to be underestimated. It is important that, so again, when we're working with students, you can ask a few questions to find out if they're under some exorbitant amount of stress that could be interfering with their ability to perform. And so again, most school settings aren't gonna have, depending on your school setting, you might have a way to retake something in the context of regular school. Again, with the SAT, if it's a particularly stressful time, then it's kind of a setup to try to do this kind of performance activity, when, whatever, you recently had some big life change. So,
What are some of the questions to ask to gauge a student's level of stress?
you might even have some good resources for this. It's really just asking the student, hey, is there, what are the big, is there anything significant going on in your life?
I do scores a lot with my students. Like, I had a lot of, during when 6 to 11, and during the summer of 11 students, because my kids at a camp where kids from all over the world. So, like, the first couple of days when they're in a new country, new time zone, new language, new everything, it's like, just all of it's out of whack. So it's, sometimes you're so exhausted that you do things right. So it was just checking, like, scale 1 to 10, anxious, anxiety scale, like, so much you just can't even handle it, 1 being, like, passed out, like, where you just kind of scaling on that, I felt like was really helpful, so checking.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, it can just be a open-ended question of like, hey, is there any big life changes going on in your family? Or what is your, what's things like at home? Or, or even just what's your study environment like? Or what's your school, you could just ask a few probing questions. The one I think also, I recently had a student who, for some reason, on some tests was like showing up and getting 100, and on other days was showing up and getting a 50. And I just kind of like, what's up with that? I don't know what, because I've worked with you, seems like you know the material, what's happening? And again, outside looking in, was maybe a little bit of that stuff, so, appeared quite calm and collected in the context of class. Went home, and I called mom and I said, hey, just wanted to let you know, because I'm sort of an anomaly to me, maybe you can do a little bit of figuring out. And turns out that the student was really significantly feeling anxious, like really, really anxious. And so unfortunately her mom was in a position to have the skill set and was able to tell her, well, as Girstantas said, you can always just retake it. It's not a big deal, so just do your best and we'll retake it later. Well, it turned out that was all this student needed to come in and take it the next day and get 100. It was just, it really is, it sometimes can be that simple, but again, outside looking in, it looked like she was calm. So test anxiety does not necessarily look like frantic. Many students' response to test anxiety is actually the things you're talking about, or the things you were talking about, like just moving too fast. Just kind of not even really reading the question. And I've seen this with younger students, that to accommodate the self-talk regarding, am I good enough? I don't want to be the last one done. That they kind of go through this exercise over and over and over and over again where they just race through things. And so it's gobbledygook. By the time, you know, it is so wrought with, is this what you know? Or what happened on this question? You know, and I do think we have to, it may seem like a paradox, but for most of our SAT students, getting them to slow down, like prescriptively, I want you to circle words, I want you to underline words. Those strategies are going to require them to be more present and not fall into this habits. So a lot of what, in terms of our learned habits, we are in the business of breaking habits. And because they have, at this point in their education, they have come to figure out a way to survive. And so even if they're not liking their results, they haven't perished and died yet. So that they feel like they're somewhat effective. And so it's our job to be working with them to say, well, that may not be such an effective strategy. Like, I know that it was great that you weren't the last one done with your math assignment, but you know, now it will be recorded. You know, I mean, it's a little bit about breaking those habits.
This might be a little bit too, because I think you're probably gonna answer it, if I answer myself, but like, because we do have a time limit for a lot of the tests, like there's a sense of you want them to both, so marrying the reality, they need to just kind of grasp the basic skill sets, but also be able to do them in a time conditioning kind of like, at what point in your training do you find that you just say, like, I just want you to do this skill set, I want you just to underline these words, I want you to circle these kinds of things, and not even worry about the time conditions, like, do you kind of, does that question make sense?
So in the context of SAT prep, or in the context of
Anytime
testing?
So like, I have another student who's doing the school admissions test, so like, he's a great student, but it's, you know, he's very conscious of like the time constraints around it, so
Right.
not only does he have to kind of get this, he's thinking like, okay, I have to do this, I have this many minutes, I have this many seconds, this many kinds of things, so like, in your own, knowing, especially your students are hyper aware, like, what you do in your training to kind of
Okay.
work with that.
So now we're into the last part of this. So we've got normal responses to fear. We've got our fear response, and we've got stress and how it affects our capacity to learn. And now we're going to go into the zone of weaknesses and cognitive ability. Okay? So to answer your question, I'm gonna say we're looking to create doable tasks. So we have to get, and so in some contexts it's called engineering success. And maybe Go speaks a little bit to her idea of when anxiety kind of leads you down the path of learned helplessness. You know, like I'm so conditioned to believing that I can't do, that I'm just gonna keep doing whatever I was doing because again, I haven't perished and died. I guess, I mean, it seems like it's good enough, sort of.
So it's like, it's working for them.
It's working for them on some level, and so it's a matter of us creating a task that is doable, that's timed. Like, you know, we have to really size up what is like, you know, whether it's let's do the first 5 problems in 5. So our target time may be doing each problem within 1 minute, but we might start with giving the kids 90 seconds per question and giving them the first 5, which we know is the easiest one, and getting them to the place where they can do those. And then keep scaffolding the experience so that they can incrementally do more and more. So we somehow have to sort of trick them out of their bad habits and get them into a cycle of experiencing positive success.
So can I ask us like just another question with that, because I know, and especially students who are really aware of it, like, you know, that there's like a crutch in those kinds of habits, like you kind of mentioned, and they work for them at some level. So like when you're actually talking about introducing new habits, you say, and you actually just say straight up, like, we're gonna break this habit, or just say, like, or do you say, we're gonna give you another skill set to employ here? Because I know some students, it's almost like taking away the blanket, they get really angry about, like.
So there's a couple different ways to approach it, and you ultimately have to find the way that works for you. I tend to approach it like curiosity.
Okay.
Like, hey, we've gotten this, you've got this many right doing it this way. Let's try this other way and just see what happens. And I have. I have had some very, very resistant students that I could completely see
Right.
that
Like the freaks out about, like.
I had a student, perfectly warranted extra time on tests. And he would blow through it in 5 minutes. And I knew that they were gonna be wrong. I was like, well, or at least most of them were gonna be wrong. You're like, okay, well that's cool. You just did whatever you always do. let's figure what do you think's gonna happen, And so then it'd be like, let's try this other way. Let's just see what happens if we do it this other way. And and then depending on the rapport with the students, I can sometimes be like, no, really, we're going to do it this way. We're going to do it this way.
Yeah.
You are going to do it this way. Let's do it this way. And so it can be far more prescriptive.
Okay.
But again, depending on who you're working with and kind of where they are in their test process. I mean, and certainly when you're working in a session, it's not going to, there's no high stakes, it's not like, so, yes, we were asked
I was
question.
gonna say, is it effective to say, I want you to try it, the way you usually do it, and then this way, and then let's talk about, how each way felt, what
Right.
worked better, what gave you better result,
Yeah,
kind
and
of
so that's,
compare and contrast.
so that kind of thing is this, you're really in the realm of metacognition. So metacognition is the specific executive functioning skill of doing something and then after the fact reflecting on whether it worked, whether it didn't work, how I want to adjust my habit, and then go back and try again. And so that is, I think that's a very essential part of what we do as coaches. And how you, and again, when we start, so again, my segue was trying to get us into the zone of weakness and cognitive ability. So one thing or I shouldn't say one thing, a common issue that comes up is what is called a low processing speed. So this may be, I don't know, maybe just because of the world I live in, but I feel like there's a fair number of students who have come up with this as the cognitive area that's discrepant. And so again, to have a discrepancy does not mean that you have a disability. To have a discrepancy is oftentimes a personal place of frustration and not necessarily even an observable place of problem. So the thing about a low processing speed is it really just does take longer to complete a task. And so equipping hopefully the student with an understanding of that, again, normalizing it. The goal at this moment is not that you are the first one to the finish line. And again, many kids with low processing speed are gonna have an accommodation that's gonna permit that. So other kinds of areas of weakness that are gonna be a real problem are gonna be anybody that's having struggles with retrieval. So if a student comes through the coaching avenue of things, we do a cognitive screening that will give you a sense of their auditory memory, their visual memory, their long-term memory, and their working memory. And so those are basically that aspect of, I think I might have taken it away. Oh, accessing what we know. Those are all categories of retrieval. And so hopefully, a student has one of those 4 things available to them. So if a student has a weak working memory, you'll maybe hear that more often, it will be essential that that student write down their work. If you see weak working memory and they're under time constraints, trying to perform under stress, so that's the other thing. When we perform under stress, our areas of weaknesses are going to be the first thing to go. So if you have identified an area of weakness specifically for that student, you need to bolster it with some adaptive strategy specific to that weakness. If they are having a struggle with either auditory memory or visual memory, particularly in math, if I've got a student with weak auditory memory, I spend a lot of time writing things down, and I use a lot of visual reinforcement in my instruction. So by giving them, and then when they're studying, and again, that's going into this, how they're going about learning the material, but really spending a lot of time making sure that they've got a good visual image. Because basically what you're looking for is a leg to stand on. You're looking for like at least one of your go-to places. Long-term memory is about just getting them to think about associating whatever the question is to something that they are confident that they know. What's knowable? And again, that's sort of maybe an obvious thing. And then the auditory memory, again, it may be something that if they are somebody who requires auditory memory, I had a student today, it's really funny, I was like, well, what's your strategy? Because, well, I plug my ears and I read the question, and I was like, that's brilliant, because try it. If you plug your ears and read a question, you hear yourself reading better. I swear to God, try it.
In a little mumble?
No, just read to yourself, to plug your ears and read something on a page. Right. I'll give everybody one of these things to look at. Here. Get that and read.
What am I looking at right now?
Just take something and read it, some words right there. So yeah,
That was pretty good.
Wow.
I mean, it's because basically you're just
It's weird.
isn't that weird?
And then you can do that in an SAT
Right,
because it's so quiet to yourself.
right. So no one's
So
gonna
not
stop you. So again, trying to get your auditory memory.
What?
Yeah.
No.
So, so when we're talking about areas of weakness, our sessions are going to be a place where we can problem solve these with the students, and then it's up to them to use them. So really, strategies are only as good as they use them.
So that's something like sometimes in the SAT it comes down to picking your battles. But sometimes the student's ego won't let them. Like Scott and I work with international students, they'll still try very hard vocab questions.
Yep.
That is just a reply, even though they never get them.
Yeah.
Is there any way to short circuit that?
So again, you're gonna have to work with top-down logic. What I would, I would show them the scoring system. I would show them your target score is 600. The most efficient thing for you to do is to pick this many problems that you are certain you'll get with 100% accuracy, and then spend your time on trying to get these extra points. So bringing to their attention that the test is organized, really recruit their logic. You know, there's 10 questions, you know that the first 6 are gonna be, more doable, the last 4 are gonna be challenging. So what I want you to do is do the first 6 of this section, and then I want you, or I say 2/3 really, I say do the first 2/3 of the section, then move to the next section and do the first 2/3, you know, again, and then go back and do those. And it works for the writing section, it works for the math section for sure, it works for the vocab, it doesn't work for the reading comprehension, but, you know, again, really strategizing with them about, the goal is to get the most things right. If you are wasting your time, if you're spending time on this question that you could have been spending, it's kind of recruiting that trade-off, you know, analyzing the trade-offs. But if, I mean, and I definitely, and the other problem with all of this is that under stress, people are gonna do whatever they're gonna do. You know, so that's where, you know, we do the best to prepare them, but ultimately, we never, I mean, that's what I kind of started with. We sometimes don't have a lot of control over how we respond to stress. I mean, it really is a biological thing, and so we can prepare and we can work and we can practice and we can self-talk and we can come up with strategies, and then you can just, you know, then you just get into the situation and holy moly, look what happened, you know? Yeah.
Situation like that, and do you simulate the stressful experience to kind of reinforce the learning? Like,
I had one student who was particularly anxious, and it was so, you know, I think she would get stomach aches, and so, I did in fact say, well, let's try, like, it was like, well, when this starts to happen, let's see if this will work to counteract it. And then I would do my best to sort of kind of create it. And just like we did today with, you guys missed it, but just even, I mean, I'm a math teacher and I can do, you can put a math minute down in front of me and my goodness, like.
is that what this is supposed to take minutes to do all these?
Well, it's called a math minute, but it's obviously more than a minute's worth of math. So I do think we can get a fair amount of sort of like creating a little bit of stress, and then, you know, I did have to go back and explain to the parents, like, why are they doing this? You know, why are you stressing out my daughter?
That was the next question I had, is that like for some of our, because I have a student that actually sat and like shared, and like we're just going through his process for just like answering the verbal questions, and you can even out loud, he's like, oh, I'm so dumb, and it's just, you know, like the counselor's had me just wants to be like, oh no, like.
Well, actually, that is actually what the coach should do. It's like, oh, you can't say that. No.
Yeah.
In fact, I need you to say, and you provide them with self-talk that's positive. Absolutely. You correct that self-talk as soon as you hear it, because that is gonna be the self-talk you know that's gonna be the monkey chatter. And if that is what is going on taking a test school, it's no wonder they're not making gains.
What's a good, you know, replacement for I'm so dumb?
I know that you're prepared for this test. I know that you've been working to learn this material. I know that there's things that you can do. So or even just saying, find the things you can do. Find the things you can do. Find the things that you can do. Find the things that you can do. Because there is something on every page that you can do. And as long as you keep them in that positive space of find the things you can do. Well, okay, so I can read the question, it tells me to go look at line 13. I can find line 13. You know, I may not be able to answer this question, but I can find 13. So you gotta keep them in the game, because the moment they shut down, then they're not in the game, and they've lost time as well.
When I had, you know, stress and anxiety about school because of wanting to achieve and perform, my dad would always talk me down by sitting down with me and running through what really is the worst thing that can happen.
Right. And that's actually.
And we always got down to, okay, I'll still be alive, I'll still be part of this family, I'll still have my friends, like, you know, I just won't have a name.
Yeah. Well, and actually, you know, I think to be fair for some of our students, I think that I mean, I wouldn't say that their family would disown them if they didn't perform, but but I do think that there is a lot of, implicit messages and pressure on the students. So again, doing our best to talk them through it, but they may actually have a family member that is putting a tremendous amount of stress on them. And if that is revealed, if that's revealed in our work with the student, that may be something you might want to broach with the family, like, hey, nudge, nudge. Is that really the message you're sending? Because that may be actually, stressing them out more. So, I mean, I don't think it's quite that extreme, but,
Right.
and again, this is where, making doable tasks are important in the sense of, do we need to, adjust our expectations? So I do think that by adjusting expectations, we do have a way to turn down the volume on the stress. And that's, again, so making a doable goal, and it's not to set the bar low, it's to try to find ways, and again, this may not be for all the students, but specifically the topic was kids that are for whatever reason showing us reason to think that test anxiety is impacting their performance. These are gonna be sort of the most likely reasons. So I've almost talked ourselves way through an hour and a half. The one thing that I would say, I didn't talk a lot about mindfulness, but if there's one aspect of mindfulness that is really important, is the idea of being in the present moment. And so if a student is stuck in thinking that has them worried about what's gonna happen after the test date, or if they're stuck on what happened in the last section, like, oh my God, I missed that question in the last section, then it's gonna diminish their capacity to do the task that's right in front of them. So again, it's not something that we can model it, we can help coach them towards it, but ultimately, it's something they're gonna have to learn how to do. I guess the last things I would want to reference is what if we've identified, and maybe going to that question of if we're problem solving with a student about the what ifs, if the student really does have a sense of fear that seems out of context with what you at least see the reality of the situation to be, that really may be the case that they may need somebody besides you to kind of help them unravel that fear. And so not being afraid to say that sounds like something that's really important for you to talk about, are there other people that you can talk to about that? And also, I did want to, share with I have one student that I work with for several years, and, we're all aware of the low processing speed, but eventually went and did the full battery of psychological testing, and sort of the upshot of all of that was like, nope, you really are struggling with anxiety. And so it wasn't ADD, and yeah, there's some low processing speed, but there is this anxiety that's really and so medication was part of the solutions for this student. And again, so medication is going to be one more of those bottom-up solutions. So whether we're talking about bottom-up solutions to how we manage stress or top-down solutions, sometimes both are required. And so I guess that would be the last thing that I'd want to say. There really is a zone of this spectrum that really does need to be left to professionals in fields that are besides, you know, teachers and coaches and everything else. And so, and that's the way it's supposed to be, like, you know, so it's not, you know, that, I'm observing that that's having positive results for her. So it took many, many years for her to get to that place, and her family's still trying to sort of get a sense of like, oh, she really is, this is really anxiety that's impacting her. But it was this circumstance of time after time, doing work, totally, fully competent, capable in one setting, and then going and repeatedly bombing. And so again, that feedback loop can be just as devastating as the, yes, sir.
So this is sorry if you covered this, but I know, you know, sometimes parents don't really want to see what we're seeing. Like they either don't know how to, or they can't, or they just don't. So what do you do in a situation with a parent who, like, what you're experiencing in session is very specific and very real, and they're either refusing to listen to it or just kind of not sure what that means. And so how do you kind of bridge that gap between, like, tactfully also wanting to make sure that you can still be part of the student's life and stuff, and knowing that there's an actual, like, need there that they need to be recognizing.
I don't know if it's within our capacity to, I don't know if it's within our capacity to make anybody understand anything. I mean, I think we can share with the student, you know, that, oh, there are things you can do about that. You know, just making sure, like, you know, and you know, that sounds like something to talk about with your family, or I hope you've got, you know, it can just be sort of open-ended, like, I hope you have people that you can, you know, share this with. This could really be part of what's making it hard for you to be successful with this. So again, it's, you know, and then it's, yeah, I mean, you have to take it case by case.
Yeah, well, because I also think, like, the recognition piece, so, you know, if you're being a counselor, maybe, like, coming from that place, but, like, the idea of being hurt, like, you have something.
Yeah.
So, like,
So I can see this is really, I can see this as really having an impact on you. I hope that, you know, that we can, and you can even use the we version of it. You can be recruited as part of the help that's going to be enlisted. I hope we can come up with some solutions that will allow this to improve. And again, focus on the incremental, you know, like, you know, we're just looking for improvement. You know, we're not looking to fix the whole thing. So, are there any other questions? I hope that had enough of an organization for you all, but,
Yeah, that's great.
just to recap for the folks that came in. So I started with talking about the normal fear response and the ways that anxiety and fear can be a biological basis. I then talked about how stress impacts learning in two particular, both in terms of how we acquire our learning, but also how we access the things that we know.
Okay.
And the way that habits play into that. And then we talked about how there can be inherent weaknesses in cognitive ability, whether they're structural or functional, kind of not so much matters, but that our job is to create doable tasks and then come up with strategies that are going to lead them towards success to achieve them.
So here's kind of a nuts and bolts question. If a student has low processing speed to the point that they need, that a coach or tutor, test prep tutor thinks that they need extra time on SAT or in school, how do we convey that?
So the only category of people that can provide a diagnosis of something like a low processing speed is a psychological battery of tests with a licensed psychologist.
So if any student is gonna need accommodations at school
It
or on the SAT,
Yeah.
it has to come from a psychologist.
Yes,
And they have to pay those diagnosis fees.
and it's even possible, and like I said, it is possible that you could have a discrepancy in your processing speed that is frustrating and challenging for you to do the things you wanna do, that is not going to allow for there to be extra time on those particular tests. In which case, with that information, you just might adjust your expectations.
Yeah.
You know, so there are lots of different kinds of institutions, school settings. You know, you may not wanna be at a public school. You may wanna be at a school that has open-ended projects and seminars. You may want to, so again, you know, to me, the upshot of any formal or informal testing is information. I have information to make choices about how I want to live my life. And so it's about supporting somebody, making a reasonable connection between their goals, dreams, ambitions, and, you know, there's more than one way to get to a destination. You know, so you know, we obviously spend a lot of time thinking about the SAT, but, you know, again, there's lots of other institutions that, you know, I mean, the SAT may not actually be the measure that reflects their abilities. And then it's important for the student to know that about themselves and not to think that they're just not capable.
Right.
And then, you know, that they would write us, you know, if we're talking about colleges or if we're talking about jobs, if we're talking about school. And that's, but the thing is that many schools and teachers will allow extra time. Like extra time, you know, there's teachers over at CHS that I know for certain offer extra time, and you don't need to have a diagnosis or a set of testing or a 504 plan to get extra time. But again, it's a good place to start. It could be even enough to say, hey, I want to just run my own experiment. You know, would you be willing to let me have extra time and see if it makes any margin, you know, marked difference in my performance? And then you're kind of leading them down the path of being positive. So if it is the case that they don't have enough time to finish a test, that, because I have seen students do that, just like what Lee did on his time test. The minute I said there's 15 seconds left, you know, creating a bunch of gobbledygook for the last few questions as opposed to maybe getting one more question actually correct. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Right.
Any other questions, comments? Is that anywhere in the realm of what you were hoping to hear?
No, it's good, no, it's really useful. It's really good.
Oh, going back to this one, don't do, can't do, that emotional distress, I think that's back to this global tasks. I'm always standing in front of the word that
Thank you.
we'll talk about one more thing, but that's okay. I like it.
Oh my gosh.
What was the one more thing?
Avoidance behaviors.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's important.
That people avoid things that are uncomfortable. That's all that was,
That's a big one.
it's a big one.
Do you
It
have
might be a
any
topic of what?
do you actually?
Well, all I was gonna say is in relating to some of the habits that we have to break down, that we may actually have some avoidant behaviors.
Yeah.
That may not be perceptible to the student. The student is not going to see,
Like going to the bathroom all the time.
they're going to the bathroom all the time. You know what I mean? Like, they might not recognize, like, oh, really, you're going to the bathroom. It's just happened. Well, it happens 3 times in the same 45-minute block. Every time you put a piece of paper down in front of me, I seem to get up and need to use the bathroom. Anyway.
Not
Okay.
me.
Do you want to do that again?
You're on camera.
I know, I saw that. Hey.
Just in time for the end of it, Lily.
Oh.
Ready to be tired.
Missed it
Speaking of-
all.
Not please, no.
Carrie, you got any parting wisdom?
There was a kid